RotoGrinders Today. I'm Jordan Cooper, a.k.a. BlenderHD. BlenderHD. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's July 12th. Friday, July 12th. You know what we do on Fridays. We talk about the UFC slate coming up tomorrow, 12-fight card as of now. UFC Fight Night Denver. We'll be breaking down the DraftKings slate for you. Hit that thumbs up button on your way in the door. Give me those thummy thumbs, right? Or do what John typically does. This little thumb, the thumbs across. Is that a thumb? Is that some other appendage of his body? No. You don't know. Very, very agile with it. Hit that thumbs up button. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification bell to know when we go live. If you're looking for baseball content, we got MLB Grinders live later tonight, 5 o'clock Eastern. And then Crunch Time follows that right after at 6:20. But we also got Crunch Time for MMA tomorrow. John will be on that as well. So let's talk about the UFC Denver card, which at some points didn't seem like there were many fights on it. But now we got plenty of fights. We got 12 fights. And headlined by Rose Namajunas versus Tracy Cortez. Let's first talk about the main event. 9,000 for Namajunas. 7,200 for Cortez. We know with the Namajunas the fight that always sticks out in my head in UFC history is Namajunas versus Esparza, because you just sat there for five rounds wondering how the judges will score a fight that has almost no punches landed and no takedowns attempted. I know I tend to at least be, maybe not you, tend to be under on main events because I think that overall, macro-wise, they tend to be overowned. I think maybe are you going to be on board with maybe not having as much of Namajunas, maybe having a lot more of Cortez at 7,200 than Namajunas at 9,000?
So yeah, I knew exactly where you were going with that Namajunas as far as the fight. It was funny. I was sweating two different GPPs that night, and I needed Rose Namajunas to win one. I needed Esparza to win the other. I thought, well, I'm set. It's going to be a good night. And then they did. And they went out and did nothing okay. I think as long as the winner scores 60 points or something, they did nothing for 5 rounds. This one, yeah, I agree. So I kind of like the main event. I like the main events when they're probably going to go 5 rounds. Because a lot of times what you have is two very powerful fighters that are facing each other in a main event, kind of like Alex Pereira and Yuri Prochazka. But it's it's really just another fight. And it might be a good fight, but it might not, because it's probably not going to go 5 rounds. This one is probably going to go 5 rounds. So, yeah, I kind of like it. I don't love it. They're not going to be super high volume. And we've obviously seen Rose Namajunas absolutely do nothing over the course of 5 rounds. And I agree. I like Tracy Cortez a little bit better for the price than Rose Namajunas, but it's not a main event I'm particularly looking to avoid.
Well, I mean, I bring up the Esparza comparisons for that fight because I think this fight sets up very similarly, where Esparza's main strength was in the wrestling, and I assumed Namajunas' strategy was, as long as I don't get taken down, I win the fight. Well, Tracy Cortez's normal game plan is wrestling. So if Thug Rose goes into this with, as long as I stuff takedowns, I win. We may get another fight that looks similar to that. But on the flip side, I think based on the context of the slate, we got some 9K fighters that have good ITD lines. We have mid-range fighters with good ITD lines. I think the field, we have Rose Namajunas' projected ownership at 33%, which is quite low for a main event favorite on a 12-fight card. This was a 15-fight card. Okay, that would make kind of sense. But 12 fights, it's not small, but it's not big. It's quite possible that Namajunas as long as they do stuff, could score 100 points in a 5-round decision. And for that price, and with no other underdogs really blowing it up, that could still be optimal. I know we're going to have our Sims out later today or tomorrow morning for premium members. Also with Liam and Mike's Ground and Pound podcast, they break down every single fight. So me and Squirrel Patrol, we're more DFS strategy guys, right? We're looking at lineup constructions and optimal lineups, but they'll break down the fights. I get the sense that in the Sims that Namajunas won't be like low, but I would think that it's quite possible that Cortez's optimal rate may be higher than Namajunas'. But the downside to that is that I think Cortez is also going to be very like 35 to 40% owned because some of these lower everyone below her is not all that appealing. She's plus 170 to win at 7,200. That it's quite possible that like Rose wins isn't optimal. And all these Cortez lineups are dead anyway. But on the other hand, if no underdog wins, Tracy Cortez optimal rate is going to be absurdly high because in a 5-round decision, as a wrestler especially, it's hard for her not to score like even like 50-55 in a loss.
Yeah, actually, yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that's a lot of the appeal behind Tracy Cortez is she's probably got a really solid floor. I mean, if this fight I think it's minus 250 or more over 4.5 rounds, and so that's I do think that Rose Namajunas Carla Esparza fight was a total one-off. That I don't think we're going to see that again. There might have been some. Liam has a thing that he said on his own YouTube channel. I think he maybe even mentioned it on the Ground and Pound podcast. Like Carla Esparza was getting married a few weeks after that, and that Rose Namajunas and Carla Esparza are friends, so maybe they just kind of went in with an agreement not to really mix it up. I think that over 5 rounds, and this fight's almost certainly going to go. Well, I would say almost certainly, right? But it's heavily favored to go the 5 rounds. I think there'll be enough volume to give it a pretty solid floor to both fighters. And at 7,200 for Tracy Cortez, like that floor could be very valuable, even in tournaments. If nobody price below her wins. I think I do have some interest in Rose Namajunas as well, because I do think there might be decent volume. Just looking at some of the fight props, I think it's about 85.5 significant strikes for Rose Namajunas, about 73 or something for 75 for Tracy Cortez. That's a pretty decent amount of strikes. And then there's some takedown potential as well. So yeah, I mean, I kind of like the main event. I do think Tracy Cortez might end up being rostered more than Rose Namajunas. I think we're showing her projected ownership as being higher, but just by a little bit. I think it's a toss-up which one is going to be higher owned, but it wouldn't shock me if it's Tracy Cortez.
Let's talk about the other 9K fighters on the slate. We got Luana Santos, 9,200 against Agapova at 7,000. We got Gabriel Bonfim, 9,300 against Angelusa at 6,900. And we got a recent add to the card, Evan Elder, 9,400 against Darius Flowers at 6,800. All three of these fighters have a 75+% win probability. Elder minus 425, Bonfim minus 300, Santos minus 415. All of them are favored inside the distance, minus 125, minus 175, minus 130, respectively. We showed the ownership is going to be high on, 30, 40% on all three of these 9K fighters. I'm not saying that you can't play, and I'm not sure if you're building a lineup that doesn't contain a 9K fighter on the slate, although we do have some mid-range options. But how would you rank these 3 9K options? Because I don't think there's a cross-off. I don't think there's a, like, oh, okay, well, this guy, we see, like, oh, the $9,400 fighter, how much do they have to score in order to be optimal? I think on this slate, like, all three are, like, kind of in the same bucket of, like, they're all going to need to score, like, 110 plus. And I don't think the $200 range difference is going to matter that much on the slate with the underdogs that we could play. So obviously Bonfim has like first round, like knockout, like the highest probability of that. But outside of that, he's got 5 minutes if it reaches round 2, it's going to be hard for him to score 100 points. Then you got Elder, you got Santos. So what are your thoughts on these three fighters, and who are you more likely to be overweight and underweight?
So yeah, just slate context. It's actually I think it's a slate where not much differentiates itself between the 12 fights. And if you look at the win odds, that kind of speaks to what we're seeing in the win odds. That the lowest win odds I think belong to Darius Flowers, but he's still 320, 325. That's still about a 22% chance of winning his fight. Usually, most cards this year we've had somebody below 20% win odds, and I think there's only been a handful of other cards this year where we've had the worst fighter still has a 20% or more chance of winning their fight. So I don't think you need to go to any of these fighters, really. And I don't think you need to avoid any of there's nobody that's like a cross off on the bottom end either. It's like, oh, this person has no chance of winning their fight. I think if I'm ranking the 9K and above fighters, I think I like Santos the most, Luana Santos. I think she's got the most takedown potential. I think you could see her getting multiple takedowns. I think you could see her getting like a ton of control time. One of those fights where it actually goes the distance, but you're kind of glad that it goes the distance because she ends up with like 4 or 5 takedowns and a bunch of control time. She had some significant strikes. So that I think she's my favorite of the 9K fighters. Then it probably goes to Gabriel Bonfim, and then Evan Elder. I think Bonfim has some takedown upside as well. I think he's more somebody you're buying into because of the early finish potential, but I'm a little bit worried about that in Denver. And the new gloves do seem to be having an impact. We haven't had a UFC event in a couple weeks. I think there's been a disproportionately few knockouts with the new gloves. So maybe the first round knockout isn't as possible. He could get a submission as well, but I don't know. We'll see. And then Evan Elder is probably the one that scores the worst if the fight goes the distance. So I think my ranking is Santos, then Bonfim, then Elder.
Well, I want to highlight what you mentioned, that they're fighting in Denver, which is at elevation. So in general on this card, the variance is going to be what? Is going to be higher. In general, a lot of times you'll hear, and you'll hear in the fight breakdowns, this guy's gas tank. That guy, they have a great gas tank. This guy, he constantly gasses out, and now at elevation, it's going to be even worse. I'm not necessarily sure that, I would analyze the fights as if it's just a neutral and realize that at elevation, someone is more likely to gas out, but it doesn't necessarily mean this person hasn't gassed out in 7 fights. It's like, dude, death gassing happens at the fighters almost can't control it, that it can come out of nowhere where a guy is dominating the fight in round 1 and then round 2 just falls off a cliff and you're like, what happened there? And it didn't matter if it's in his previous fights, he was great. It's just it's stuff that just happens. So I'd be much more inclined, in general, I'd be much more inclined to be a bit more contrarian on this slate, especially, we're not dealing with the highest level of fighters. It's a fight night card that they had to piece together to begin with. So would I be shocked if Gabriel Bonfim knocks down Angelusa in the first round and then tries to finish him, and then in the second round comes out and just dies, and just Angelusa takes him down and submits him in the second round? I wouldn't be shocked about that. And it doesn't matter what his past fights look like or anything. And I think a ton of these fights, Al-Razak Al-Hassan, we'll talk about the mid-range fight that has, the most likely to end early. Abdul Razak Al-Hassan, 8,500. Cody Brundage, 7,700. This is a fight that could outscore any of the 9K fighters on both sides. Al-Hassan, obviously, first round knockout equity, is pretty much a one-dimensional striker. And then Cody Brundage, who wrestles but is not good, and he tends to go for guillotines and not get them. But he's plus 225 inside the distance. This is the type of fight where if it gets out of round 1, I wouldn't be surprised if either fighter just it's elevation and the fight that someone dies and just by just pure exhaustion.
Yeah. So you said it, like additional slate context. We are in Denver. I do think that adds volatility. I think we'll have a couple of these fights where the winner is determined by the fact that we're at an altitude. But we don't know which fights it's going to be. We don't know which fighters it's going to be. So I'm not really out there trying to predict that. And I think that anybody that has any kind of information on that is baking it right into the line itself, which is, the first thing that we look at is, well, who's favored? It's the first thing that DraftKings looks at when they set their prices. So I'm not putting a ton of stock into who's trained at altitude and stuff like that, because that's probably baked into the lines. I think some of these lines would be different if if we were not at altitude, but we are, and it's baked into the line. It's baked into the price. It's going to be baked into the ownership. It's interesting. I think they just added Evan Elder and Darius Flowers. I feel like that was just a few days ago. It seems like from Darius Flowers' social media, he basically got a phone call just like a few days ago. It's like, hey, you're heading to Denver to go fight Evan Elder, which could be why that's the widest line on the card. I agree. I do think it adds some volatility, and I do think that's baked into the lines. And what I said is we've got a lot of close lines on this card. It could be a card where we see a bunch of upsets, and they're not necessarily dramatic upsets by the odds. They just seem dramatic to us. Like, oh my God, I can't believe, the $7,300 fighter or the $6,900 fighter won. It's just, that's the pricing. And so it does make some of the underdogs maybe relatively more appealing, because even when the odds are kind of flat throughout the card, DraftKings still has to kind of go through and be like, well, so this guy's 7,900, this guy's 7,800, this guy's 7,700. So there maybe is some benefit, or the underdogs are a little bit more appealing on this card, I would say.
So what are your thoughts on the two mid-range fights to target based on ITD numbers? Alisson versus Brundage, as well as the middle mid-range fight, the $8,200, $8,000 fight, Dober versus Gene Silva, who we just saw. I mean, he barely had to do anything in the octagon his last fight, so he's fine with a quick turnaround. But Drew Dober and Gene Silva are essentially a pick'em. Dober's plus 170, Silva's plus 115, and then Alisson is minus 140, Brundage is plus 225. I mean, these are fights that I would not play in cash games, because it's more likely that one guy scores a ton and the other guy scores nothing. And it could be either side, and I don't want to get stuck in that spot in cash. But for GPPs, I mean, we're projecting 42% ownership for Abdul Razak Alisson. I know his optimal rate, I'm assuming, is going to be like his round one odds are plus 200, which is about 33% if you don't count the VIG. It's hard for me to think that the sim output will show, like, if he gets a first round knockout at 8,500, I think he's probably optimal. So 42% ownership is probably high. Like, he's probably over-owned, but he's not someone that I'll be like, well, he could only beat me in 5 minutes. Go try to beat me in 5. And if he doesn't get in the first round, all those lineups are not going to be optimal. I still think you got to play some of him, because that could happen. And you could say the same thing for guys like it almost feels like the Dober Silver fight is actually the over-owned fight compared to Alisson and Brundage, because I just don't. I mean, these are mid-range prices, so I mean, you could mix and match these kind of any way. So, what are your thoughts on both of these fights, and what do you plan on doing, at least as of now, with going heavy on a fight, going heavy on a fighter? I know you're big into, like, I roster people at whatever their first round odds are and nothing more, right? Like that. But there's probably going to be a leverage situation where maybe even being less than the first round win odds on Alisson may be more beneficial.
Yeah, I agree. So you knew exactly what I was going to say about Abdul Razak Alisson. He's too highly owned. I don't know if he's really going to see that much ownership as much as we're projecting. Maybe like he's got 200 plus 200 odds of getting a first round win. That's his win condition. That's 33%. You should have him on 1/3 of your rosters. That's it. That's it. His chances of getting a big score in a second round win, probably not that high, probably equal to his chances of getting a first round win that somehow doesn't score that well. So yeah, I agree. I think he should be owned at about 33%. And that's just it. It does make me somewhat interested in Cody Brundage, though, because actually I don't know if Al Hassan really. I don't like that plus 200 bet. Like I would not bet Al Hassan at plus 200 to get the first round win. And I do. I think maybe the elevation it plays a factor. Maybe the new gloves are playing a factor. But that does make me a little bit interested in Cody Brundage because Cody Brundage just really isn't that good of a fighter. Like watching his fights, there's been kind of this like sequence of events that's ended up with him still in the UFC when maybe he shouldn't be. And so yeah, but I don't know. Like Al Hassan is not that good. Like Al Hassan should not be 40 something percent owned, and just the fact that he does have the best first round win odds on the card, he's probably gonna draw some ownership. And Cody Brundage can do a lot less at 7,700. I'll probably own about equal amounts of Brundage and Al Hassan. I won't go crazy with the fight. It's possible the fight just completely busts, but I would rather be over the field on our ownership, projected ownership of Brundage than our projected ownership of Al Hassan. The other fight, John Silva and Drew Dober. I had to look up because I saw John Silva on this card, and I thought, oh wait, did his fight get postponed? Was it canceled and rebooked? Like, no, he's just fighting again. It's just 2 weeks later. I think we're about 2 weeks later, and he's fighting again. I think he was on the very last card, wasn't he?
Yes, he was on the UFC. Right, he's two weeks later, but I mean, he barely had to do anything. He won early, right? Yeah. So this is a late. I mean, some of these fights were just literally set up within the last 2 weeks. So it's not like, oh well, he only had 2 weeks to prepare. It's like, well, half the fighters only had 2 weeks to prepare. They only had like 7 fights like on the card as of like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. So this fight, I might actually be a little bit under the field. I do like John Silva as a fighter. His scores might be a little bit inflated. Like he's not necessarily as high volume as the game log would indicate. He's got like 115 points and 104. But he's got 3 knockdowns between those 2 fights. Knockdowns are very volatile. I feel like I see guys get punched all the time, and and their opponent falls to the ground, or and it was a stumble. It wasn't really a. I was like, well, the guy's on the ground. He got punched. That seems like it should be a knockdown. And vice versa. I feel like a lot of times, I feel like I see a guy get leveled, and that wasn't a knockdown. I don't know. I think that, I think John Silva's not high volume enough to maybe like warrant some of the ownership that I think he's going to get. Drew Dober also not necessarily that high scoring. I think these are two these are 2 lightweight type guys that you would not want to actually fight yourself. So that tends to influence the ownership. Like people, like anything can happen. I don't know. I might be under the field on these guys and just go to some of the other fights just based off of ownership and volume.
Well, none of the fighters on the slate I would actually want to fight.
Right.
I don't think anyone. I wouldn't. I don't care. Maria Agapova. I mean, actually, I would be the most scared of Maria Agapova. I mean, truthfully, she is nuts. So let's talk about the cheap underdogs, right? Because you always come out with an article, Squirrel Patrol, Squirrel Takedowns, right? It's not hitting the nuts. That's the other sports, but your takedowns articles, you typically pick 4 underdogs that you can maybe a little bit over the field on. We mentioned Tracy Cortez, right? She could still be optimal in a loss if all the favorites win. But like you said before, I think there's going to be a lot more volatility on the slate, and I think that this could be there could be underdogs that win on this slate. The most popular underdog outside of Cortez is probably going to be Damon Blackshear at 7,600 because of like the line value. It's nearly a pick'em now against Montel Jackson. The fight most likely goes the distance, and Blackshear has the wrestling, and typically he he goes to it. He's not like a low fight IQ guy. But I mean, if he loses a decision, it's still possible that he doesn't make the optimal lineup. So he may be a little bit over-owned at currently we have at 31%. But like 7,600 is not even like that low. I mean, Julian Erosa has almost no chin, but I mean, he could still win fights. Salikov versus Ponzinibbio is like the senior citizen battle in the code main event. They're both old. I could see that fight either ending really early with a power punch or just being a sparring match because they're just going to go out and just, hey, I mean, I say these guys are old. Ponzinibbio's 38 and Salikov is 40 and I am 45. So like these are still young. These are younger than me, but they're old for UFC. And then you have the really low underdogs like Agapova against Santos, Lusa against Bonfim, and Flowers against Elder. Let's talk about underdogs in general, right? That aren't under Cortez. So your favorite, like, most likely be above the field that is not Cortez, but above her. And then which of the three bigger underdogs are you more willing to take a shot on?
So above Cortez, who do I like? I do think I like the idea of being over the field on Cody Brundage. I do. I like Blackshear. I do think his ownership's a little bit high. It's one of those things. He'll be one of my highest rostered underdogs, most likely. But I don't know if I'm going to be dramatically over the field at 31%. But he put up 65 points in his last loss. Like, that's a great volume. So if that's a win at 7,600, that's pretty good. I mean, if he gets another 65 point loss at 7,600, I mean, that's not terrible. I have some interest in Charles Johnson. I think that the fight between him and Joshua Van is going to be a little bit of a higher paced fight. It's going to be mostly strikes, but they have some takedown ability. So we might see a takedown or two in that fight. And then when they're on the feet, they'll probably be throwing at a pretty good pace. So I like both Johnson and Van in that fight as being a little bit underowned. Just because I think people are going to see that it's got a good shot at going the distance, so they're not going to have any interest. But I think even if it goes the distance, we can see a pretty good score. We might not see a bunch of fights end early on this card. So I'd rather be over the field on fights that I think will be at a really good pace. And rather than go for relatively weak like finish value, if that makes sense. You skipped over an underdog that's not really an underdog, is Jasmine Yazoo Vicious. I actually do have some interest in her. I'm going to make her a Squirrel Patrol's takedown because it's my article, even though she's a slight favorite now. It's my article, can do what I want. But I like her volume. She put up 169 points in her last win. I don't think she's going to do that again. But like I don't know. I mean, she throws a really good volume and she's got really good win equity. And I'm surprised we're not seeing her with more ownership. I think she'll probably be higher owned. I think we've got her at what do we have her at? Yeah,
26.
26, 27%. I think it'll end up being higher. I'll definitely be over that 27% mark just because I mean she's the favorite in a fight that should score well. So and she's only 7,800. So I'll probably go with a good amount of Jasmine Jasuda Vicious. And I don't mind actually Andre Petrosky either. I think he's got the chance to get some takedowns. I was surprised that his on the prop market, his over under for takedowns is 3.5. About equal odds on both sides. And that's pretty decent number for an underdog. I don't know that I love him to win this fight, like more than the odds indicate. I mean, it's about a toss up. But yeah, I think Petrosky is not going to see a ton of ownership. I'd be surprised if he hits this 35% mark that we've got projected. But I will probably, I'll probably be around that mark, even though I think that I don't know that his ownership will actually see 35%.
So how about the cheapies? If you have to pick between Agapova, Lusa, and Flowers, which one do you take?
It's a tough call. I think any of them are viable. I agree. Agapova seems crazy, and I don't like the idea of rostering crazy fighters. So probably on Lusa. It's a pretty tough call between Lusa and Flowers. I'll go Lusa. I think there's a possibility like the Flowers Elder fight doesn't score as well, which is like more of a concern for Elder, obviously, than for Flowers. But it could have some concern. Like I think if Lusa puts up a win, yeah, which is and keep in mind he's a heavy underdog, but if he does put up the win, I think he could put up an excellent score. Like it's an absolute slate breaker. I think there's a higher chance that Flowers gets a win that's maybe not necessarily a win you need to have if you have a bunch of underdogs win. So I think from the three cheapies, I'd rank them Lusa, Flowers, then Agapo.
And John Breslin, aka Squirrel Patrol, he'll have his takes also on our expert survey. We also have the fight breakdowns from Liam. We got the sim outputs, the optimal rates based on our projections and simulations. This is all for premium members. I know that you got mostly baseball going on now, but we got PGA, we got WNBA, we have cricket projections, okay? I mean, that has nothing to do with DFS, but we got all the stuff for Prize Picks, Underdog, sports betting, all of our statistical stuff, all of our tools, combo premium package. Click on that link in the description. We're running a special right now, $40 off your first month. So join us in the Discord and read Squirrel Patrol's takedowns article tomorrow for premium members. Listen to the Ground and Pound podcast for all the fight breakdowns for tomorrow's 7 p.m. Eastern card. So you get to spend most of your afternoon, barbecue in the heat or something like that. But Squirrel Patrol, you'll be on what time's Crunch Time's going to be on earlier in the day tomorrow for MMA with you and Mike, right?
Yes, I definitely don't think we'll be doing like a 6 p.m. Let me look up the schedule.
I think it's 1 p.m. Eastern, right?
It's on the schedule for 1. Sometimes we change the time. We'll see. We might push it closer to the fight. Maybe not. I don't know. I got nothing to do on Saturday, so I'll be available. But yeah, we'll have the we'll have crunch time for MMA, and should be good. Cricket. I've heard that cricket is actually the biggest DFS sport in the world. It's just FanDuel and
in India, tons of people play it in India.
Yeah. And it's not like, I don't think it's like FanDuel or DraftKings actually in India, but there is some company that has a DFS site. And it's extremely popular. So it is actually the most played DFS sport in the world, according to what I've heard.
Well, programming note, just want to let everyone know, next week is the MLB All-Star break. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, there will be no show. I will not be here, right? So the next time you see me is next Friday, where it'll be me and John again talking about whatever the next UFC slate is. Are you at least looking forward? Are you looking forward to do you have anything? Do you have a trip planned or something for the All-Star break or whatever? Because I don't play the All-Star game DFS contest. It's like All-Star break to me is kind of like it's like you get to relax, sleep in, you do stuff like that. Unless you're grinding out like WNBA 2-game DFS slates. I don't know. Some people people are hard workers.
Yeah.
Which side are you on?
I have no plans. I don't know. We'll see what the All-Star schedule looks like. I probably will do like one baseball All-Star lineup if I do anything. Just like to watch the game. There'll still be golf. There'll still be UFC to prepare for. So yeah, it'll be interesting. Maybe I'll take a look at some best ball. I haven't really done a lot of that.
But, I was gonna say that. I was gonna say you got 4 days to do all 150 best ball drafts. Can you do it?
Yeah. Take all that time that I spend on baseball and just pile it right into to underdog drafts or best ball drafts. Yeah.
Hit that thumbs up button on your way out the door. I'll do the double one. You can do the double one on the bottom. The double appendage. You see all the thumbs across the bottom of the screen. Hit the thumbs up button, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell to always know when we go live. Remember, this show, you won't see a thumbnail. You won't see my face Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of next week. But you will see Everyone else tonight on Grinders Live. Dean and the guys, they'll be covering the baseball slate tonight, followed by Crunch Time with Kevin Roth to go over all of the weather if there needs to be weather updates tonight. We still got baseball over the weekend, but enjoy the MLB All-Star break and UFC Denver tomorrow. And I'll be back. I'll be back again a week from now, talking about all things you're thinking about in daily fantasy, props, and pick'em on RotoGrinders Today.